So we're talking about relative risk reduction, which is a way of describing how much a risk is reduced. Sounds straightforward, so why are we talking about it? Because it gets a little weird. To illustrate, on a purple tablet, 60% of people have a heart attack, say, whereas on a pink tablet, 40% will. The pink tablet reduces the risk, but by how much? Well, the absolute risk reduction is 60% minus 40%, which is 20%. Simple. The relative risk reduction, however, is the proportion of the risk that's gone, not the absolute amount. So it's 60 minus 40 divided by 60, which is 33%. That got a bit mathsy. The way to think of it is that the 60% is all the risk, and we've got rid of a third of it. So how does relative risk reduction behave? So looking at a line, in the middle is a treatment that does nothing, homeopathy. At one end is something that without everyone dies, and with everyone survives, so parachutes, and at the other end everyone would have survived, but the treatment kills everyone, so arsenic. So at homeopathy, no one gets better or worse, so the absolute and relative reductions are both zero. For parachutes, 100% of the risk is removed, so both the absolute and relative reductions are 100%. At arsenic, things get weird. First, we're increasing, not reducing the risk. The absolute increase is 100%, as 100% more people die. For relative risk, this is expressed as a proportion of the initial risk, which was zero, and therefore dividing by zero gives infinity. So absolute risk reduction runs from minus 100 through zero for no effect to 100, whereas relative risk reduction runs from minus infinity through zero for no effect to 100. Weird. How else is it weird? Well, if something reduces the risk of an event from 2 in 10 to 1 in 10, the absolute reduction is 10%, but the relative reduction is 50%, because 1 is 50% of 2. If we reduce the numbers to 2 in 100 and 1 in 100, the absolute reduction goes down to 1%, but the relative reduction stays at 50%, because 1 is still 50% of 2. 2 in 10,000 to 1 in 10,000 is an absolute reduction of 0.01%, but the relative reduction is still 50%. This is because the relative risk doesn't reflect the background incidence, which might be good if you want to compare some things, but it's less good for explaining how good something is to a patient. So now we'll change the incidence but keep the absolute reduction the same. If there's a drop from 90% to 80%, that's a 10% absolute reduction and an 11% relative reduction. Drop that to 50% and 40%, and the relative reduction increases to 20%, and drop it to 20% and 10%, and it increases to 50%. So when the background risk is high, absolute and relative reductions are similar, but when the background risk drops, the relative risk reduction gets bigger, faster. So when to use? First, the absolute risk reduction is more understandable. How many people would benefit? 20%. But the relative risk reduction is bigger, 33%, so sounds more impressive if you're trying to convince people to prescribe or take a medicine. Plus there's some nerdy maths reasons that we don't need to worry about. Overall, don't use the relative risk reduction.